Welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast, episode 7, Paying for Care and the Role of Care Annuities with Graham Duffy.
Retired or thinking about retirement? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast. In each episode, we bring you an important conversation with insight, tips and knowledge, all designed to help you live a fulfilling and successful life in retirement. Here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner and Accredited Later Life Advisor, Justin King.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast. If you're new here, a very warm welcome to the show. In this episode, I'm going to discuss paying for care and the role of care annuities. 57,000 people needed to fund the cost of living in a care home, and only 6% opted for a care annuity, and yet 24% of self-funders run out of money. Demand for care is increasing, but there is still a lack of awareness of how this can be funded. There are many different ways to fund care, and a care annuity is just one option, but it's relatively little understood solution. Graham explains what a care annuity is, the tax benefits, and what it may cost you. He also shares his latest thinking on social funding limits, which impact on how much of the care home fees you are responsible for paying. Graham's role is to help people get the very best possible outcome at the very end of their retirement. With 25 years background in insurance and life expectancies, Graham's knowledge is unquestionable. He leaves us with tips on where to go for specialist advice on how to fund the care you may need and the importance of putting a power of attorney in place. Here's my conversation with Graham Duffy. So I'm very excited this week to be joined by Graham Duffy from the insurance company Just. And Graham is a specialist in, well, all things retirement, really. He spent his career in retirement, not his career in retirement, obviously he's been working hard, but within the kind of care world and the retirement world. So obviously an expert in the world that the Retirement Cafe deals with. So welcome, Graham.
Hello. I work for a company called Just. My title is actually care specialist, so I'm at the very later end of the retirement market.
Right.
It's for those people that need care, and specifically as a company, we are looking at those people that have to self-fund that care.
Right.
As a company, yes, as Justin said, we are very much into the retirement space. So at retirement, through retirement, with the possibility of equity release and the long-term care at the end of that retirement. We're a FTSE 250 company.
Wow.
We've been, when you take into account, there's been a couple of mergers and takeovers, etc. But we're a company that's now been around for 23 years, I think it now is. So well established and lots of data in respect of longevity, effectively, which is what we are basically.
So how did you end up in this kind of world then, Graham? What's your background?
Well, I actually used to work in the Lloyd's, Lloyd's of London, insurance market, and a colleague, stroke friend of mine, set up a company called PATS, which was the Pension Annuity Friendly Society, which was the first company to actually underwrite individual cases for pension annuities. So in the good old days of compulsory purchase annuities.
Right.
So rather than people just accepting a rate from their existing provider, going into the open market, and we then came up with the underwritten individual rates for people retiring basically with ill health.
Okay.
I think Stalwart was the same kind of thing in the market. They were the smoker annuities that were done at the time. So we were actually trying to come up with a rate that was commensurate with the assessment of the individual's life expectancy.
Right.
And that's by getting medical evidence and our underwriters assessing that and then giving them a rate that was commensurate, as I say, with their life expectancy.
Okay. And so obviously the pensions world and the later life world has changed significantly in the last, over your career, obviously. We're in a big new world now, aren't we?
Yeah, and obviously, as I mentioned, the mergers. Just is actually now a combination of two companies, one called Just Retirement and one called Partnership Assurance, that effectively came together following the pension freedoms. So when the pension freedoms were announced, both companies were annuity providers in the enhanced space. And obviously that had an effect on the volumes of business for both of those providers. And the other areas we were both into was equity release and care.
Right. So
it made sense for the two companies to come together as one rather than competing over a smaller market share. So that's the new brand is Just.
Right.
Just Group PLC.
And tell me, what does the future hold for the kind of annuity world and the care world, etc.? What's your view of the future?
As far as the the retirement annuities are concerned, we're still selling a considerable amount of enhanced annuities because there is still a market for people that want that guaranteed income for life,
right?
Which is what we tend to call that product now. We actually call it a GIFL, which stands for Guaranteed Income for Life. Because I think when you do surveys, you find that people, after the pension freedoms, annuities have got a bit of a bad name in general. But when you talk to people, and surveys that we've done will suggest, they say, I don't want to buy an annuity, but I do want a guaranteed income for life. So I want the best of both worlds. So there is still a reasonably big market for that, albeit it's obviously contracted, and a lot of people are obviously going into drawdown, etc. Equity release is another big area in terms of people being property, rich, asset rich through their properties, but not having much income and releasing money to enhance their lifestyles. And obviously the care annuity is like a super enhanced annuity for those people that are wanting to fund their care. And it's a tax efficient product in terms of income and IHTs.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about that tax efficiency. Or maybe if you were explaining to our audience what it, a lot of people will not ever heard of a care annuity. What is it? And how does it work?
It's an annuity contract, but again, it tends to be known as an immediate care plan is the generic term. It is for people that need care or getting to the point where they're actually going into a care home, or perhaps they're, the family are looking to place them in a care home, or indeed they could be having full-time care in their own home, so domiciliary care. And what we're effectively doing is it's a very uncertain situation with regard to any individual of how long that care need will be required for.
Sure.
And no one's got the crystal ball that can say how long it will go on for. And it could unfortunately be a very short period of time. Equally, it could be a very long period of time. And especially with the kind of problems there are now with dementia, some of those people that have severe dementia problems, they can still be physically still very strong in terms of a good heart. So they can actually live on a long time with that kind of condition. But they need help doing things every day because they've forgotten perhaps how to dress themselves even, and things like that. So the contract is it's medically underwritten again. So we get medical evidence from the general practitioner and the care provider. Right. We underwrite that, and effectively we are assessing a life expectancy. So we're assessing how long we think that person will live. And bear in mind, the average age of the annuitant for care plans is about 85, 86, so they're quite elderly. So the rates generally for annuities will be better at that age, and then anything that's wrong with them should help enhance that rate.
Okay.
We then underwrite that plan and we go back. So if you wanted to generate, say, £25,000 a year, i.e. the difference between, say, your care fees and your actual income, 25,000 is the gap or shortfall. It may cost you, on average, between 4 or 5, but they're all 4 and 5 times that amount. So you're looking at 100 to 125, 130,000. If you then want to add in things such as escalation, i.e. to meet the fee increases every year, that will increase the cost. If you want capital protection, that will increase the cost, because that means that if you do die much sooner than expected, there could be a return to the estate. But there's also a deferred option, so you can defer the start date for us paying out the benefit, which will actually have the effect of reducing the cost. So there are different options that will hopefully cater for each individual client's preferences, etc. So I think we cover all that off.
So, how big is the market for care annuities? How many do you write a year?
We actually not that many. We get, out of the 57,000 people that went into a care home last year, so this is not including domiciliary care, 57,000 went in on a privately funding basis. Right. We only got applications for about 3,500 of our plans. Now, I would stress that we're not saying it's the answer for everybody, so for some people it may not be appropriate, but we still think there's a much, much bigger market. Yeah. It's just a lack of awareness of people not knowing that the product actually exists.
That's less than 5%, isn't it?
It's about 6%.
6%, okay. Yeah. Wow.
So, but the thing is, so there's enormous potential already, and according to the latest reports that have come out, the demand for care home places is going to increase significantly in the next sort of 10 years or so, because of the ageing population. Yeah. And more people of those people will be self-funding because they'll have assets that
are over the 23,500.
Current 23. Now the government may change that level, but there's still going to be a significant amount of people who will have to self-fund.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, of course, there's alternatives, aren't there? So you can either just pay for it yourself, you may have a pension pot. Obviously, you mentioned that the equity release market. I mean, that's I can see there's a huge amount of wealth in the UK now tied up in properties. So now I don't advise on equity release any longer. It's just not really the market that we're in. But I do know about it and did the relevant qualifications, etc. when I used to look at the products, they always seem to be a little bit expensive. This is maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I haven't looked at them now. Would that be a fair charge, or what's your view of the market?
The rates have come down, and there are some quite competitive rates now for equity release. And I understand it's not the market I'm actually into myself, but you can get rates of about 4%, which is better than the sort of 7 or 8% that they used to be. As far as care concerned, equity release can be a bit difficult, because if you're going into a care home and your property is going to be left empty, you will not be able to do equity release. You won't be able to use your property.
Right.
If you stay in your own home and you want to release money and have the care delivered in that home, then there's a possibility you could do it that way. On the equity release side, there is actually a thing called the Local Authority Deferred Payment Agreement.
Yes. Which
could be an option for, it's like equity release, but it's actually provided by the local authorities. Basically, if you meet the criteria, they should be offering it to you. And the interest rate is actually very low. It's only 1.45% at the moment.
Great.
So that could be a good one. And it's obviously a drawdown equity release, because it's funding your care each month.
Yeah.
So that might be an option for someone to fund their care
using
their property.
Sure.
But the commercial equity release market, you wouldn't be able to do it if you're going into a care home.
No. Okay. So, I mean, there's going to be huge demand. We know there's an ageing population. There's a lot of criticism aimed at care homes as well, whether finding good quality care homes, finding it. And then obviously there's a huge, there's a very small take-up of your products, which must be challenging for yourself, as well as also you kind of think that that's a challenge to the people going into care. We will have listeners, listening from all parts of the country. What would your advice be of how that they could go about, if a family member is getting to that point where you're thinking, I think they're going to need some extra help and assistance. What would your advice be to someone in that situation? What's their starting point? Where do they go?
I think, first of all, it's interesting. Financial advisors, as you're aware, you've got the qualification, need to be qualified to advise. So first of all, they've got to be at a minimum of level 4 diploma status. Then there's the insurance qualification, either Chartered Insurance Institute or the other examination through the IFS. And then you can actually take, which I think you've also got the higher level of accreditation through the Society of Later Life Advisors, SOLA. So those advisors have actually got a very good spread of knowledge. Now, they're not going to be detailed knowledge about every aspect of NHS and all these different things, but they've got enough knowledge to know where to direct people to get information, advice and support. And then if it's a self-funding situation, the advisor can then also advise and recommend accordingly how they feel that person should fund that care. So ironically, financial advisors actually have got a good spread of knowledge. What you'll find in this area, that there's masses of information out there. If you Google anything to do with funding long-term care in the UK, there's hundreds of millions of websites. I think it's 140 million last time I checked. Right. And if you want to do that and try and make sense of all those different bits of information, then great. Yeah. Why not go to someone that can actually help you with all of this? Help cut through some of that stuff, tell you what's applicable and what's not applicable, and go from there. And then again, when you come to talking to some of the charities are very good in terms of the information, I'll call it, and sometimes guidance, because they will have fact sheets about all the different aspects. What can you give away once you've got to the point? There's a thing called deliberate deprivation. You might not be able to give any assets away when you've got to the point you need care. Can you qualify for the NHS to fund your care, NHS continuing healthcare? Right. Lots of great fact sheets about all of that, but again, you get that information. Those charities can't then say, this is how we would recommend you fund that care. That's got to come from a regulated financial advisor. And what you sometimes find within local authorities and the NHS, it's a bit silo mentality in that those people might know everything about their particular area, but that would be a very narrow band of information. Yeah. Once you go beyond that, they don't know, and they perhaps don't even know who to refer you to. Whereas a financial advisor that's qualified in this area will have a very good spread of knowledge. Yeah. So getting information can be very frustrating, and some of the seminars that we've done together, that's been reflected in what people have said. And it's ironic that if financial advisors were more heavily involved right from the start, so care homes directing people for advice, working with those advisors proactively to ensure that the self-funders take advice, it can only help everybody. Yeah. And it can also help prevent people running out of money, because if they run out of money, they fall back on the state. Yeah. And according to reports done a couple of years ago, about 24% of people self-funders do run out of money. So. Right. So there's benefits all round to people seeking regulated advice from ensuring that those advisors are qualified to give advice in this area. It's a very specialist area.
And I think SOLA, which is the Society of Later Life Advisors, I think they have a website which we'll put in the show notes, which people can go and refer to and find an advisor on a list and someone local to them.
That's right, you can do that. Yeah.
The other thing that you mentioned the seminars we've been involved in, our Retirement Cafe seminars, the live events, and one of the things that keeps coming up is issues around capacity and powers of attorney. Mm-hmm. People are getting really, family members are getting really caught out, aren't they, with not having the right power of attorney in place and getting really stuck.
Yeah. It's actually hugely important that we should all actually, once you're an adult, you should actually have a power of attorney in place, because we just never know what's going to happen. There was an interesting article in the Sunday Times, I think it was last year, that did a cost comparison. So some people are put off doing a power of attorney because they tend to want to use a solicitor, albeit that you can actually do it yourself through the government's website, but they'd rather use a solicitor, and the solicitor might say, the Sunday Times example, they said £500 for a solicitor, and then the £82 registration fee.
Yeah.
If you could, they then had a chart where they compared that to if you haven't done a power of attorney and it's all got to go through the court of protection.
Right.
And the cost there, with all of the fees, etc., that were included, it was £2,200.
Okay.
So it's a false economy not to spend the £500 on. And bear in mind, some solicitors will do it cheaper than £500.
Yeah.
It really is a false economy not to put your power of attorney in place.
Yeah.
So it's a hugely important document. You cannot do anything without a court say so. Under the Mental Capacity Act 2005, you can't do anything. And it causes huge problems for families that haven't got a power of attorney in place. So massively important.
Yeah. And I suppose often the kind of point is, I'm too young, it's not going to happen to me, or my wife, my wife will have access, or my husband. And of course they can't. They can't act. Even if you're married, you can't act.
No, you can't. No. And I know of advisors have told me stories of turning up to meetings with sons and daughters that start talking about what they're going to do with mum and dad's money, and mum wanted to give the property to me. But that's a bit extreme. But they just start talking about, and then when the advisor asks to see where's your your power of attorney document, they say, I haven't got one of those, but it's my mum or my dad, so I can do what I like. It's a complete misunderstanding of how things work.
How the law works.
Yeah.
So it's a real issue. What are the kind of innovations that you as a company are looking at? What are the kind of the market is going to be? Well, you've probably got the statistics, but the market, I think, is going to be huge. The care market is just going to grow and grow and grow because of the population need. How do you think you'll get a greater awareness for the products that you provide
I think we generally need to do more awareness with the public. We and I specifically have done a lot of work with financial advisors through training them, getting them qualified. But it's all very well for those advisors who've got their own clients that they can get that information to those clients and say, come and talk to us if you get in this problem, get into this situation. But there's a lot of people out there that don't have a financial advisor. No. And they've never perhaps used one. They might have only ever had the bank, and that's all they've done. So their mum or dad goes into care, or they go into care themselves, and they're unaware of anything that can be done. They're completely unaware of the plan that we have. And I think that's been demonstrated at some of the stuff that we've done, also some of the other seminars I've done. If I've asked who's ever heard of this product, and no one's ever heard of it. It's just very frustrating, because it's actually been around for about 20 years now.
Yeah.
But it's a very small market in terms of providers. There's only ourselves and Aviva that provide quotes for this, and we only do sell it through financial advisors because it is a pretty sensitive area.
Yeah.
And obviously what we've got may not be appropriate for some of those people. So to sell it direct, I think would be inappropriate. So you need a good regulated qualified advisor to analyse it and see whether it's the right recommendation.
I'm feeling that the education probably needs to be at the point of care, the point of entry to the care homes, that they need to be directing people to getting the right advice. I mean, they're going to know probably quite well what someone is, how to get them assessed, and probably what they're going to be entitled to, whether they're going to be able to get the continuing healthcare, which we know is very debatable, and then obviously the attendance allowance, and et cetera, et cetera. So, but they're not going to know the intricacies, are they, of your product? So,
well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think there's a lot of people that they don't know some of the assessment processes, and they're not told.
Right.
Things like attendance allowance, there's a lot of people that should be getting that and not getting it.
Okay.
There have been also a lot of people that should have had their care funded through the NHS that haven't had it funded. and people have claimed money back after the event, so after the individual's passed away, families have actually claimed money back from the event. And the problem with that is it's the aggravation and the stress of doing that as well.
Yeah.
And it can take years to get it as well. So if you've got the time on your hands to deal with all that, then fine. But yes, but then once you've covered all that off, there is a lack of awareness of the product, and the product is an immediate care plan. So it is at that point of need, and it's a bit frustrating that it's not more widely. There's that lack of awareness, because it's in the interest of also the care providers to actually have one of these in place. There is a disparity between what the council will pay for someone's care and what the private payers will be paying. There's a big cross subsidy from private to local authority. If somebody's going in privately funded and they buy one of our plans, it's going to guarantee those fees at a private rate for the rest of that person's life. The care home then doesn't have to worry about them dropping down to the local authority rate and what they then do. Do they take the hit on their bottom line? Do they ask that person to be moved to a cheaper room, or indeed to a cheaper care home somewhere else, down the road, which will be very upsetting for that individual. So it prevents all of that sort of thing happening. So.
Sounds like you could even possibly negotiate an attractive rate with your care home because of the surety of the income, maybe. I don't know.
That is possible. It's getting less likely because on that cross subsidy, care homes are putting the private fees rate. And I was with some advisors the other day that said they had a client where the care home was taken over by another group, and they put the fees up by 12% immediately.
Wow.
So some of the care homes some will still do it and agree to what they call a fee capping agreement if you're guaranteeing the fees at the private rate. But others are saying no, because because the most you can put on the care plan, I think we only do up to 8% escalation, and I think Aviva do 10%, but it would be very, very expensive when you're looking at those levels of escalation.
Yeah.
So if you can say put 5% and get the care home to agree not to increase by more than 5, that's great. That's a way to seal that situation, but it's getting more and more difficult to do it by the sounds of things.
And you mentioned before there's some tax efficiencies around the product, this care annuities. Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, as long as the benefit from most annuities are taxable because they're paid to the individual. This annuity, as long as it's payable to the registered care provider, be it the care home or a care agency for care in your own home, we can pay the benefit without any deduction of tax. So it's deemed as 100% return of capital.
Right.
So it's tax efficient in that way.
Because there's no income tax.
There's no income tax to pay. It's also deductible from the estate if you've got an IHT liability. So if there's an IHT liability on the estate, any money you spend on that annuity is immediately outside of the estate. So you could argue it's actually only costing you 60% of the cost, because you would have paid 40%.
Sure. So if it cost a couple of £100,000 for the annuity and that £200,000 was going to be liable for inheritance tax anyway, then you could say that actually, it's only actually going to cost you, or net cost to the estate of 120,000 rather than 200,000. So I can see that's that could swing the pendulum the other way, I suppose, on a decision.
It could make it more attractive for people. And there's no argument about the fact you're not evading tax. You're not even, it's just a genuine thing to be covering those care costs.
Yeah.
So if you cap those costs for an individual, they won't run out of money. So you are potentially saving the state money further down the line if the money did run out.
Yeah. The other thing that I think people worry about, obviously there's a cost to care, but I get the impression most people don't want to end up in care.
No, well, it's not on my wish list.
Not on their bucket list.
Mind you, they are getting more luxurious.
And this is it. What would if you were advising your elderly aunt, and that was the scenario, and I don't know, let's say she was based in a region miles and miles away from you, so you couldn't actually physically go and do it. What would the guidance be to someone who was looking, for people who were looking for care? How would they go about selecting a good care home and, or domiciliary care, which is care at home? What would over the telephone, what would you say to somebody about the type of steps that they need to go through?
I think that there are companies now that will provide a service to look at what the individual is looking to achieve, do they have these activities? But the only way really, if it's care homes, say, is to go and visit those ones and get the feel for them.
Right.
And I think you do. I mean, I've been to quite a few over the years with advisors and done relatives and resident seminars. And as soon as you walk in, you get a feel for that. And it's just literally going in, talking to people. Obviously, the Care Quality Commission have a report on how well that care home is performing. Yeah. So you can have a look at that. There's a few other databases out there around care homes. But I think it's only that personal feel that you can really get. And the same with domiciliary care agencies, go and talk to the management, but also see if you can speak to a couple of the carers that will be coming out. And there are quite a lot of domiciliary care agencies now that are springing up because of the demand. Their problem is getting the right the right staff and the right numbers of staff to deal with it all.
Yeah.
And I think there's been some publicity on that literally yesterday and this morning around how they're struggling to get the staff to run their agencies and their care homes.
Sure. And you may not know this, but what's the rest of the world doing with this, aging population? Has everyone got the same problem? I mean, the States got across Europe, we've got the same problem.
In the Western world, that's certainly the case. Yeah, aging, people living much, much longer. Different systems in America. Funny enough, we've launched a product in America ourselves for the immediate care plan.
Okay.
So we've got some people out there working on that, trying to develop that product out there. But in America, there was a lot of pre-funded long-term care insurance.
I remember.
So pre-funding against, so you're younger and healthier,
and
you insure against that need in the future. But that market has contracted quite considerably, as I understand it, because of the fact that the claims experience went very bad, people needing care earlier than expected, going on for longer than expected. So insurers have actually either increased rates dramatically or they've withdrawn from the market, etc.
Right.
So that market's contracted. Places like Germany, there's a state system where you all pay in to like a care insurance, if you like.
Okay.
So, and it works different ways. And that's, funny enough, there have been some proposals. There's a report that came out from the Keynes Fund last week around what are the options for funding, to sorting out the social care issues in the UK or in England. And when you look at the Tory manifesto last year when they said we're not going to have the cap on the cost of care, we're going to have a floor, so you spend your capital down to a level rather than up to. That got criticised. So they then said, no, okay, we will do a cap. And the last thing they've said is that they would do a cap and a floor.
Okay.
And so this King's Fund report analyses what the different options are. And back on the cards is something that came up about 20 years ago, which is what they call free personal care. So a personal care allowance to cover not just the medical side, but the social care part of it.
Right.
And that could be better. I think it will cost too much money personally, but we'll just have to see what the government do. And there's a green paper literally due out anytime now, really. So we'll have to see what comes out of that. Because that's what 20 years ago, is it 20? Well, not quite 20 years ago, about 15 years ago, they introduced that free personal care in Scotland. So everyone thought that care is free in Scotland. Not strictly true, because you still pay your hotel accommodation costs if you're in a care home,
right,
which is the bulk of the cost in actual fact.
Of course. Yeah, it's just trying to see how everyone else is going to deal with this this huge issue, really, I suppose. And we know the NHS is under more and more pressure.
Absolutely.
And we've got this scenario with bed blocking, and then have we got the care home? Have we got the capacity, I suppose, for the residential care companies?
I think we have. Well, there will be, because I think if you get it right, it can actually be quite good business. But you need the self-funders. You need to be able to charge a proper amount of money that you can make a profit out of. Otherwise, you can't set up a business that's just going to go bust within a few years.
No.
And that has happened. Some of the bigger groups have gone bust because they were too dependent on local authority funded people where they don't get enough money.
Yeah.
And some of those groups have actually given notice to the councils to say, we don't want any more council funded. So I think there will be more care homes, but the local authorities will struggle on the amounts they're paying to place their people where people haven't got assets. They won't be able to do it. It'll be very difficult. There'll be a shortage of beds there, but not necessarily on the private side of it.
No, therefore that kind of brings a postcode lottery into it as well, doesn't it? That some councils are going to have a real tough time because there isn't the asset richness of the property prices comparable to other postcodes which people have got. They a high percentage of home ownership and therefore property ownership. In fact, I suppose, whereas you kind of watch property prices shoot up over the last 20 years and sometimes think, well, how good is that for people coming in and trying to buy houses and all the rest of it? It's probably going to get the country out of a hole to a certain extent on the basis of being able to pay for care.
Yeah.
Because at least and maybe there is not going to be so much money passed down the generations purely because it's going to be disappearing in the care costs.
It's interesting because from that King's Fund report that came out last week, they obviously surveyed people as well going different parts of the country. And most people's attitude was, funny enough, the property is sacrosanct. You should not be making people sell their property to fund their care.
Right.
And so that seems to be something that people are a bit paranoid about. Now, you can argue politically all day long, well, why shouldn't you have to pay for it? Because you get some people that say, look, But the argument that these people put in was the government encourages us to buy property, and then all they do is effectively take it away, so we have to fund our own care at the end of our lives, and it's all gone again. So what was the point? Because we wanted to leave that as a legacy for sons and daughters, etc. So it's an interesting point about the property and assets generally, about whether people want to leave them for future generations. And it doesn't, if you're spending, we heard today like 50, 60,000 a year, it doesn't take long to get through quite a considerable amount of capital. So, and then you're down to the 23,250 when the council will step in. So it's a difficult one to know how yes, property has gone up hugely, and that's where a lot of people have been caught in the self-funding trap because of that. This literally because they own a property, they may not have much else in terms of assets. But if you say bought a property and for £10,000 under right to buy 20 years ago, as you say, suddenly it's worth 300,000. On the other side of the coin, I did some work up in Manchester a couple of years ago. Last year it was. And there was a guy there that said he gets a lot of people he talks to, and a financial advisor. They're self-funders, but their property is literally only worth about £80,000 because they've got a small terraced house in one of the sort of areas of Manchester. Now that's probably gone up quite a bit since then. And equally, around parts of Manchester, you've got certain homes that again cost £1,500 a week. So, when you go into the sort of footballer type areas, that's when you get very expensive homes, and it doesn't take long to get through a considerable amount of capital.
No. So interesting world, really. I suppose. It's challenging world, interesting world. Anything, any kind of words of wisdom that you would give any of our listeners, just as a final comment of that you could pass on, or you wish that you could make sure everyone knew?
I would say advice, but from a regulated, qualified, preferably SOBR accredited financial advisor that will, if they're not going to be able to help you in terms of going through the rigmarole of getting continuing healthcare, but they can at least point you in the right direction. They at least have an understanding of how that works. Most of them will probably also know whether you've got any chance of qualifying. Unfortunately, for a lot of older people, they won't. So I think if more people could be encouraged at that point of need to take advice from a regulated, qualified advisor, it can only help the system all round. Yes, people have to pay for that advice, and I'm not saying that, but sometimes that money you spend on that advice could be the best money that you've ever spent if you find, it's finding the right quality of advisor to make sure that they cover all those different aspects and look at the situation holistically for that individual, and their powers of attorney, etc.
And of course, as you mentioned, there's a lot of information on the internet, but there are some fantastic resources I know from the charities, etc. We'll put some links into there on the show notes. I know that Age Concern and different people do some really good stuff, don't they?
So fantastic.
So we'll put some notes in there for people to get more information. And if people, just as a final note, Graham, if people want to find out more about you and your company, where can they go?
Well, the website for consumers, bear in mind we don't sell directly to the public, it is the Just Group PLC. And as I say, our products are all about the retirement area, basically. So all the information about us, and we're a publicly quoted company on the FTSE 250. So, and when you look back through the different, we've been around for about 22 years now. So,
great.
So it's really, we're just trying to help people get the best possible outcomes through and at the end of their retirement. That's what we're all about, really.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me. That's been really insightful, and I'm sure our listeners will get a huge amount of information from that.
Good.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you. Cheers.
A big thank you to Graham Duffy for joining me on this episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast. What a huge insight that was. So many people I talk to don't know how they're going to pay for care, or don't know the ways that they can pay for care. So I really do hope that was enlightening. Let me know what you think about the points we discussed in this episode, and you can send me an email at jk@mfpwealthmanagement.co.uk, or you can connect with me on Twitter at JustinKingCFP. If you'd enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review or subscribe. You'll never miss it, so you'll never miss an episode. So until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Cafe podcast with Justin King. To find out more, you can find us online at theretirementcafe.co.uk.